This was the place that I would really try to hone my own skills, develop myself, learn to serve better, and then take those learnings and try to apply them with others. Once that level of authenticity is not there and the trust factor is not there, then your ability to have that repeat business or your ability to have that referral goes away. One of your biggest things you'll have to do is figure out how to get all the egos to function well together, because typically when you're leading a group of other leaders, everyone has their own priorities. You hit your own threshold every so often. That's just the way it is.
Some of us quicker than others.
Some of us quicker than others. That's why we have to have teams so we can talk each other off the ledge. And that is probably the most work you can do to advance your own leadership skills, capabilities, and opportunities, is to make sure your emotional intelligence is constantly being worked on. You got to believe in what you're doing. You got to believe in it enough where there's not overdoing the passion, but enough passion to where it gets people excited about things. When we're walking down the hallway, or when we're shooting off that email, or when we're addressing our staff or addressing our customers or anything, our character should always be on full display.
Welcome to another edition of No Holds Barred. I'm Rich Roth, and my guest today is Gary Campbell, the CEO of Johnson Health Center and the founder of Impact Lead. And Gary, first of all, welcome.
Well, it's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to this conversation today.
I am too. And you're kind of in a transition state. You announced at the end of December that this will be your last year leading Johnson Health Center, and you'll be transitioning to more of your own business, Impact to Lead, where you're doing mentoring and coaching for business people and really helping them. It seems like the key to the whole thing is building a good culture.
It is, and building great relationships along the way too. And that's what, and it's kind of bittersweet that realizing that this is my last year at the helm of Johnson Health Center. And my wife was asking me last night, am I ready? And I didn't answer her right off the bat. And then she says, I'm going to keep asking you till you give me that answer. So I'm not ever sure you really know that full answer, but I do know that the things that I've had fun with at the health center, I get to keep doing outside of that in my own space, and building those relationships and developing other leaders and working with organizations to do strategic work and their own cultures and being able to talk about it in different places. That's a true passion that I'm looking forward to.
I want to spend a bulk of the time that we're talking together, talking about building a great culture and, helping leaders to be good leaders, because we do have so many different, business people who are in our audience. But, a little bit of background, you've been at Johnson Health Center for over a decade now, have done amazing things with that place, and we'll talk about that. But even before that, LexisNexis, Bayer, and the leadership, the culture building, the mentoring, the coaching, that's always been something that's, been a part of what you do.
It has been, and it started back, even going back to my days at LexisNexis back in the early 2000s, and working with a director of human resources who was very big on developing his team and very big on developing coaches within his team. And we had a coaching program there. So I got to go through some training on that and got to work with a team of people that we did coaching across the organization here in the U.S. And then later when I went to work for Bayer, kind of got involved in the same thing, worked with some high potential programs there, and got to work in a couple of programs that really helped develop me. And, in every place I've ever been, there's been one or two people that have been senior to me by a couple of levels that take an interest in me and an interest in my own development, because I had a long way to go. When I first left Lynchburg, Virginia back in 1997 and realized I was pretty raw and green, you learn pretty quickly that there's a lot of people that know a whole lot more than you do about things. But if you're willing to listen and you're willing to take and embrace some of those things that in some cases are lessons, but yet all are intended to help you do better, you will turn out in a way where you can pay that. It's kind of like paying it forward, and then you'll have the opportunity, which is what I've had, to grow and learn, and then to ultimately take on that role of helping develop those folks that are with me now.
Before I learned of your story, I'm sitting there thinking, LexisNexis, Bayer, these big national, really international firms and companies. How does someone wind up back in Lynchburg? But back being the key, because you were here, you had children who went to Liberty.
I did.
And, so really being close to them, coming back to the area, that was important to you.
It was really important to me. It was very important to my wife. As I always said, that she's the true boss. So when she looked at me back in 2010 and said, all three of our kids are going to go to Liberty, we're going to go back there. And I was in the middle of a pretty good gig at Bayer. And I said, well, wait a minute, I don't think I'm going to find this job back in Lynchburg, Virginia. But she kept insisting. And ultimately, we made it back and took a role with Johnson Health Center. Didn't even know what that was at the time. Didn't know what a federally qualified health center was. I had always had an interest in working in healthcare on that side.
Why?
I just had, because I always felt like it was a way to impact people in a different way. I worked on it in healthcare on the Bayer side, but that was on the the pharmaceutical side. I didn't work directly in pharmaceuticals, but the group that I worked with supported that group, and I learned a lot about that side of the business. And then when I had the opportunity to come and do the same or different level of work in healthcare at Johnson Health Center, working directly with patients, directly with providers, clinical staff, administration. And then when you realize you come into a place like Johnson Health Center, which was much smaller, the ability to make an impact was much greater. And that was something that resonated with me. That was the thing I think that really kind of catapulted me into really wanting to serve and taking the things that I had learned and amplify them in a way to truly try to make that impact.
How big of an adjustment was it for you? How different was it coming to, again, kind of being on the healthcare side of things at Bayer, but in pharmaceuticals, the corporate world, coming down to the working with patients? I mean, it seems like a very, very different world.
Yeah, it was definitely a different world. The biggest adjustment was not having the same resources. Because when I was with Bayer, for example, we had teams of people. I had teams of people that reported up to me that did the things that we didn't even have in place at the health center when I first went there. We were only 60 plus employees when I went to Johnson Health Center. So that was far different than what I had been. I had the advantages to work with at a company like Bayer. And so making the adjustment on that end was really, how do you take the things and the resources that you do have and try to build those out as you go, but yet understand that a lot of the things you're going to have to do, you're going to do them yourself. And develop people around you to pick up some of those things that may be missing, which is what we did. And then on the other side of it, the biggest thing for me was I was in our downtown location, and I had gone for the front desk. I really wanted to learn the operational side of things. And I was looking at the patient schedule for that day, getting to know the front desk people, and I recognized two names on that schedule. And I inquired about who they were. And I said, I played softball with these folks way back when I was growing up in Lynchburg, and they stayed at my house, and they looked at me, and one of the ladies always called me Boss Man. And she said, Boss Man, have you seen these people lately? I said, I have not. And she said, you may not recognize them. And so at that time, I knew that their health had not been what I'm sure they set out for it to be. And they were folks, many like a lot of the other folks we took care of. They had some chronic health issues, and our team of clinical professionals, providers took care of those people. And I wanted to get to know that better. And at that point, when I went back to my desk that day and then started to have conversations with our staff, I realized where that I was supposed to be, and that this was the place that I would really try to hone my own skills, develop myself, learn to serve better, and then take those learnings and try to apply them with others. And so that was the big difference, and really what has kept me there till this day.
Where do you start, right? I mean, you come from a situation with Fortune 500 companies, with all these resources that you just touched on, these teams of people that are working with you, and you come here to a situation that is nothing like that. And I would imagine that it would feel like you're almost starting from scratch. And for a lot of small business or medium-sized businesses, I would imagine they've encountered that same thing, whether it's, an electrician. We talked about that a little bit before we got started, but you have a background there. You see a lot of these service providers or contractors that, are good at what they do. They start their own business, but they're good at being an electrician or being a plumber, not running a business. Right. So you are kind of starting from scratch, and you did that. Where do you start?
You start with the values, and we started with our core values. And when I first got there, we didn't have any set of values or an established set of values. And so I was very early on engaged a group of people there at the health center, and we spent 3 weeks in a room, off and on in a room, and we started with a bunch of values, and we broke them down into 5. And from those 5 values, we then focused on our mission, and then we had a vision for what we wanted to accomplish as a center. So I always tell people that no matter what you have or don't have, you have to know what your mission is. You have to have a vision for what you intend to do and to support the mission, because you always want to make sure that you're looking ahead and you're having a stretch to that. And that also helps people that you hire and even your customers know where you're trying to go. But underpinning it all, you have to have a set of values that you will not move away from. So, and that's what we did. And that we based everything on our value system, and our North Star was our mission. So that's what I always tell people that.
When you talk about the values and the mission, lots of businesses have those, right? Yes. They've got a mission statement. And this is just a guess, but I would guess that less than half, maybe way less than half, actually know what it is.
Well,
right. And it's one thing to have it. It's, we're starting a business. We need a mission statement.
Yes.
And that's great. And you create a mission statement and you put it on your website, and that's it.
Well, it's funny you asked that. I had a client. This is probably 8 or 9 years ago. And I had their executive team in a room. And it was a large client. And I put up their mission, vision, and values. The values was the last one. And I noticed nodding of heads, and I put those up. I didn't say what they were or where they came from. And at the end of when the values were done, and I didn't get any real comments or feedback, and I said, what do you think of those? And they looked at me and said, they're pretty good. And I said, where do you think I got those from? And nobody had an answer. I said, from your own website. And so I knew I was in business. I said, oh, yes, now I know what we can do. I said, we can help companies recognize what their existing mission, vision, values are, but maybe we can help some others build some out. And you're right, because I have asked that question when I do a lot of talks on values as part of some of the leadership sessions that I do when I'm doing conferences or things like that. And I'll ask, how many of you have the core values? And a lot of hands go up. I said, how many of you apply them to what you do each and every day, everything? And you only get about maybe a quarter or a fifth of the hands that stay up. So therein lies a lot of opportunity. And so, and I know a contractor here in town, an HVAC contractor, very values driven, and their company has enjoyed some success or a lot of success with that. And so it works in all industry. It's just a matter of how you apply that and how serious you get about it. And any company that goes down the path of really creating momentum around their mission, vision, especially their values, and invites their staff into some of those conversations and is authentic about it, is going to have success.
So you kind of dipped your toe, maybe that's not a great way to put it, because you became more involved at LexisNexis, at Bayer, on the mentoring, coaching, culture building side of things. Right. But then you became certified as a go-giver through Bob Berg. And, and now you've incorporated a lot of those principles into what you've done at the Johnson Health Center, and the accolades since you've been there. Business of the Year, Great Places to Work. I have the whole list here. I can run it down. I don't want to embarrass you. I'm sure you're very proud of it, but you've accomplished a lot of tremendous things, helping to build the culture there and making that a place where people really want to work. So talk about how all that came together for you.
Well, I think a lot of it is truly what was, certainly in the heart. And I always wanted, years ago, this is back to my LexisNexis days, we had a vice president of human resources who really wanted to go down the employer of choice path. And he was through no lack of effort. We didn't ultimately achieve that, but we were a very big organization. And I think all the intent was good. And I'll never forget, he was passionate about that. And I still kept the slide deck. I still have it to this day. It's printed out. But I remember reading that and saying, I want to work for an employer of choice. I really like what at least the principles of the employer of choice stand for, because it really was going into a place and making the employees first. And so, fast forwarding that and all the things I got to kind of learn across time. And even when I was at my days at Bayer, my team at Bayer was about 20 or so individuals. It was 4 different groups that I'd inherited. Kind of, I don't want to say we were misfits, but I went in for one specific, level of, I guess, excellence or expertise that I had at the time, and then took over procurement operations within our business unit at Bayer. And so I picked up a couple of the other groups that really didn't fit anywhere else, because Bayer at the time was doing some reorganizing. And so they kind of lumped our operations group to support all the other units into one area of procurement. And I remember one of the groups we had, none of the 4 had ever worked together before. And then as I'm looking at them, I'm like, how do we bring these 4 groups together? So we set them in a room and we spent 2 days really kind of going through what each person did and how they could help each other. And it was shocking to learn how much overlap there was. And so when we came out of that group, we became a one cohesive unit. And I remember that we changed the culture of those 4 groups, those 20 people, in 2 days, because when we left that, everyone knew each other better. It was a lot more conversation was going to take place. And so the next 2 years I worked with these folks, it was one of the highest producing units, I think, that they had seen in that whole procurement division there on the side that we were supporting. We even had a couple of our policies passed over in Germany that had never happened before. So Bayer had at the time global policies, and they would have about 8 global policies, and 2 of ours were adopted. And they said that would likely never happen. Mm-hmm. And it all was a result of the fact that this group had come together and were working as a unit. And so when you can do this on any scale. So when I got to Johnson Health Center and looked at some of the things, there was a lot of things that were happening in silos, and you just can't provide great patient care operating without really having great conversations with people. So in 2014, when the transition was going to happen and I was going to take over as the interim, I really kind of stood in front of all the staff at the time, which was right around 100, and said, we will become the employer of choice. We will make it about our staff, because if we take care of our staff, our patients will be taken care of. And anybody we do business with or do life with is going to be taken care of. And I think that was really that statement alone really propelled us, and it got people excited. That was the vision. When we talk about vision, the vision was to become the employer of choice. And we went down an 18-month path of that. And once we were successful in achieving that employer of choice certification from the original employer of choice certifiers at the time, because it was Joyce Joya and Roger Herman that wrote the original book on, becoming an employer of choice, and which was what we were aiming for back in the days at LexisNexis. And it focused on leadership. It focused a lot on leadership, but it also focused on how healthy you were as a company financially, and it focused on the benefits plans that you had. So we felt pretty good about where we were at the time with that. But the real thing we wanted to measure was what do the employees think about us as a group of leaders? And I knew we had work to do, and we still have work to do, because once you get that, then the bar goes higher every time out, and things become a lot more difficult. Then the bar is always set for when the person comes in. A new person comes in, then their bar is where you have it, and everybody wants the bar a little higher. So when you think about culture, and you think about it as a leader, or you think about it as a business owner, you have to always have a finger on the pulse of what people are thinking and what people are, what the narrative is in their lane. Because I always say, if you don't monitor and control the narrative yourself, somebody else will. And in today's climate especially, it's very difficult to maintain the kind of culture that may have been easier to maintain 10 years ago, because people have people have different levels of expectations, especially coming out of the pandemic now. So culture work is very difficult, but it's the most rewarding thing you'll ever do.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because culture has definitely become one of those buzzwords, right? We certainly see it in business. We see it in sports. You talked about being a softball player, loving sports, and we all have our favorite teams I'm a Jet fan, so the culture there is, I mean, it's like people want to avoid that place like the plague. And it's like, oh, every time a new coach comes in, I'm going to change the culture. I'm going to change the culture. So when I hear you say that you changed the culture in 2 days, I'm sitting there going, wait a second. How does that?
Yeah, that's unusual. We had nowhere to go but up.
Right.
So that was of that team, smaller team, so it's easier to do it. And then you set the groundwork. It does change over time. But
what's the first step that you recommend that businesses, teams, coaches, whatever, do to begin to change a culture? Because it's a process, right?
It is. And I go back to what I said initially is understand what your core values are. And does the organization have core values? Does the organization live those core values? And then if you're not the CEO or the owner of the company, how do those core values apply in your own group? And I always tell people, you have to first model the way. And if once you model the way so others can get an example of how you lead or how you work within a group of people, what kind of teammate you are, that it all starts with that. Even individual contributors can have an impact on the culture because people tend to gravitate to those who want to help other people out. I mean, not everybody, but certainly the ones who want to achieve more than maybe just that paycheck day to day. They will gravitate to those that they believe can help propel them in their own careers. And so I always say that the starting point is with each individual person. And what do you want out of this thing? What do you want out of the big picture? My thing has always been, how do we help other people achieve their own vision of success? And if we can marry those up in some way, then that's the place to always start. Is you have to ask and understand where people are. You have to get a current state assessment of where things are, and then you got to be willing to do something about it. So, you hear a lot of folks that want to do these focus groups on things. They'll do an employee engagement survey, then they'll throw some focus groups together. But then what happens after that? And it really is getting an honest assessment of where things are now, and taking an honest approach at wanting to change the things that can be changed. Mm-hmm. Now, not everything can be changed, but how you communicate that, how do you communicate your no's is important too. It's easy to communicate the yeses, and you have to be able to communicate the whys, but the ability to communicate the no's is also very important. If you have to say no to something, you have to explain why, and you have to help people understand, the rationale behind the no, because there are some no's, and there has to be no's because you can't say yes to everything.
Mm. And the no's obviously have a more negative impact. People want something, you're telling them they can't have it. Yeah. And, so having a rationale and a great explanation and helping them to understand why, and maybe it's just not a no, but it's a no, not now. Here's True. What we need to do in order to get to a place where that becomes
yes. a yes. Yes. And the other piece is never stop listening or asking. I mean, I've been at the health center now for it'll be 15 years soon. That in and of itself is quite the achievement. But in leadership, I'm going into my 11th year, or in the chief leadership role. But we're having meetings right now to ask more questions and to learn more, because I want to hear what people are thinking. I want to know if you're asking this, if on the staff side, on the employee side, if they're asking questions that you already know the answer to, you feel like, but yet you want to know why they're asking those questions, you may learn something as to why they're asking those questions that may help you flex and think differently of the answers that you initially thought you were going to give. Mm. So we're having a meeting this week that really kind of goes to the heart of helping us with our own strategy and our own path forward, with some thought processing coming from the folks that do this heavy lifting every single day. So that should never go away, because once that goes away and you stop putting your finger on the pulse of those people who are doing the work each and every day, you may lose a little. You'll lose some of those gains that you've captured along the way. So that's the thing I've always tried to be a big proponent of, is we have to stay visible, no matter how big we get. Even if you're doing virtual calls and virtual sessions and let people see your face, there's a visibility component that goes a long way with your staff.
Talking with Gary Campbell here on No Holds Barred, the CEO of Johnson Health Center for the time being, and the founder of Impact to Lead. And that's kind of what's next for you, is diving into that full force, helping coach and mentor people and business leaders and managers and owners and all those different things. And what kind of put you on that path was becoming certified as a go-giver through Bob Burg. Tell me a little bit about that and how that, for lack of a better word, impacted you to create Impact to Lead.
So that's actually a really great story. It was the year was 2013. And
so right before you got to Johnson.
Right before I was still at I got at Johnson in 2011, but this was before I went there as the director of human resources, then moved into the chief operating officer position, and then later into the interim CEO role, and then ultimately the CEO role. But every year my family would go to Myrtle Beach, and the kids were, at the time the kids were in school, or my son had just graduated, so he was getting ready to go into a full-time sales position. And every year I would get a book to take to the beach and read. We've had one week we carved out and we all went, stay the same place every time. Creatures of habit. And I still have this 2002 Jeep Wrangler that I was having an updated stereo put in at Best Buy right before our beach trip. And so I walked over to Barnes & Noble, and there the Go-Giver book was on the shelf. And I remembered reading a short blog from Bob Burg on the 5 laws of stratospheric success. And essentially what those laws do, it's just really, if you summarize them, it's adding value back to people's lives. And it resonated with me, just that short 2-page blog. So I saw the book. So I got to have the book. So I took the book to the beach. And so when I got through the second chapter, my son and I were sitting on the beach, and he was getting ready to interview for a position with Cintas at the time. Okay. And or he may have gotten the position, was getting ready to go to work for him. And I remember him talking to me about his philosophy on sales. And I'm not. He always said I should have been in sales, but I'm not the sales.
So he's right out of college.
He worked for a year for my wife's firm, who ran a media brokerage firm, but he had a lot of great ideas, but that group wasn't ready for a lot of his innovative ideas at that young age. So then he took a position with Cintas. And I remember talking to him about his approach. And I said, after I got through the second chapter of that book, I said, you got to read this book. I said, then I'll get it back and I'll read it and we'll debrief at the end of the week. So sure enough, we did, and he did. And then we both debriefed at the end of the week. I finished reading it. And his whole approach from reading that said, wow, I want to be that. I want to serve, and I want my sales to serve and add value versus sell just for the value back to me as a
just to get the signature.
Yes. And I thought at the time, I said, well, I hope he applies that, but he did. I mean, he's been doing sales now since that day. He works for Boston Scientific now. He's very successful. He and I do some things together from an entrepreneurial perspective. We have a couple of businesses, but his approach is authentic and honest. And it truly exists to serve and add value to others. And that's what resonated with me. And so when I read that book myself, it forced me to look in my own value system, and it helped me orchestrate my values in such a way that said, all right, now I know what I want to do as my own consultant. And that's how the Impact to Lead was born. The impact came out of those reading that book and really kind of walking through, the value-driven approach to leadership and adding value to people's lives, so that, that return would come back to each person that sought out to add the value. You would always get the return back. And so that was really what got me moving down the path of the Go-Giver. And before I left Myrtle Beach that week, I reached out to, there was a contact on how to get in touch with, Bob Burg's people, and I did. And that was Kathy Tadgen, and she still works very close with Bob Burg, but reached out, and she reached back out to me, and she says, well, they had a couple of programs that they would certainly, I could, apply for, be qualified for. And the long and short of it is I did, and then went to one of their conferences and got certified as a speaker, which was almost traumatizing, because I'm having to speak in front of Bob Burg, but I got to know Bob on a very personal level. And he is everything the book is about. He wrote it, he co-authored it with John David Mann, who's also written a bunch of great books. And Bob's written, he's been involved with the Go Giver series with John David Mann, has written some other things too. But this Go Giver book in particular was one that I kind of honed in on and became a certified Go Giver speaker and coach through them. And, but that has really kind of crafted some, the framework of how I launched Impact to Lead.
We talk a lot, and we've talked and we will continue to talk about, training, coaching, mentoring, business leaders, CEOs. But what you brought up about your son, just from a sales perspective, because it seems to me that, what you're talking about isn't just for leaders, managers, CEOs, whatever. It trickles down to everybody, but it really resonates on the sales side because it's so important to, not just be out to get that signature, to get that sale. It's, if we really can't be helping people with what we're selling them, then we probably shouldn't be selling it because, it doesn't help them, but then it winds up backfiring on us too, right?
Well, it does. And I think in some organizations or some sales structures and framework, once the initial sales, once that salesperson goes in, and I mean, I've been approached with sales like this, even on the insurance side, way back when I used to, entertain, insurance. My friends of mine would go into selling insurance, and this was a long time ago. But I remember always saying, you can buy this up, you can cancel it in 90 days, because then I'll have the commission and.
Right.
And I probably did that a couple of times to help some people along. But then I stopped. I said, this doesn't sound right. But then I thought about that's probably not different in a lot of places that sales can go in. You sell as much as you can sell. And then if they return it, they return it. But you've moved on to something else. But you've likely sold something they didn't need. And, my approach, it's kind of like with leadership and everything else. If we can't be authentic and honest and transparent in our dealings with people, then it all evolves around trust. And trust is the last, the last letter in the impact model is building that trust for the commitment to excellence. If you can't build that trust and build those relationships, you may get by with things once or twice, but then once that level of authenticity is not there and the trust factor is not there, then, your ability to have that repeat business or your ability to have that referral goes away. And I think that was one of the things that when my son and I were talking, and I said, a lot of these things are built on repeat business. I said, if you can build and even if you're not looking at repeat business now, you may be looking at referrals later in life. So if you've worked with somebody and you build a relationship, and you've helped them build their own business and achieve their own vision, that can come back and benefit you in a way that you probably never intended. You may need that reference 10 years from now, or they may refer you to sell somewhere else, or refer you to a large client somewhere. I mean, that's a lot of how, when I think about the work that I do, I don't do really any advertising, even on the impact stuff. It's mostly word of mouth. And, if you treat people fairly and, not the expert at everything or the end all be all to say the least, but if you try at your best to be as good as you can with everybody you come in contact with and be a good resource and a good steward of the time they give you, and then just offer to help them on a level that may go beyond the agreement that you're engaged with, all of those things I think play to your favor.
Maybe this isn't the right word, but is it almost oversimplifying it to say you're playing the long game rather than the short game?
No, I don't. I think that's a very good way to put it. It is you are playing a long game. But when you think about relationships, especially in the world of AI right now, I mean, AI has become front and center of everything we're doing. But at the end of the day, things are still going to hinge on those relationships. And when all of the dust settles with AI, when it outpaces our ability to keep up with it, and all of a sudden things level off and plateau, we're going to be back to how do we leverage these relationships that we're all merging these things together to take advantage of things and optimizing them for, the benefits of our business or the benefits of our customers or the benefits of ourselves for that matter. But it really is. It is about playing the long game and building out. Bob Berg also wrote Endless Referrals, which is his client base was largely real estate professionals, but he branched that out in tenfold. But it is around how do you continue to get those referrals that that build on each other. And it is about building those relationships and serving people in ways that, being that differentiator, being that indispensable partner with people that that'll have them ask you back.
You already touched on the T, trust for impact, and that's the end. That's the last letter.
The end and the foundation.
So
the end and the beginning.
I want to go back, though. I want to go through kind of each letter, even if it's just briefly, because they're all extremely important in, the company you founded, Impact to
Lead.
To lead. Thank you. But the foundation was really Bob Burg's Go-Giver. So what are the one or two key points that you picked up from him and that, that certification, that training that you went through that really had the biggest impact in Impact to Lead?
Well, when I went to his first conference and got to know him a little bit, one of the things that really, that I think that's probably the biggest takeaway was how he approached everything from a very positive point of view. And, when you think about, and at the same time, there were people that went and had to do their, I forgot how long the speech we had to give was, but it wasn't, it was longer than anything I'd ever done. And doing it in front of him and the rest of your classmates at the time, and then a couple of other of his staff. But never once did I feel that it was that any of the criticism wouldn't be positive and constructive. And I think when I was doing my work with Bob Burg and certainly doing these conferences with Bob, I've done a couple of conferences with him since and actually been part of a couple of his conferences. He always ended these sessions, or at least the latter sessions of what we call Mastermind Series, with having each person go around the table and saying one positive thing about the person that's in the room with them, what they've learned in a couple of days. And I just remember when I thought about building Impact to Lead, and I thought about the Go-Giver principles, which is really about, again, going back to adding value to people's lives. It was, how do I take that and take the value system and really construct a business model that I wanted to, number one, drop into Johnson Health Center, but number two, how do I apply it just overall? It was really based on the positivity and tone that I experienced there, the encouragement, and the ability to constructively make you better without making you feel as if you kind of stepped into a hole and it would take you forever to get out. And I always responded well to that type of, not discipline, but when you're coming along and you're learning and you work for different people, there's ways that you respond to that might be better than others. And I've always been one that responded better to help me understand where I've made the mistakes, but also help me understand that it's not the end of the line.
As a CEO, leader, manager, whatever, the thing that you touched on, different people are motivated, or different people maybe responds a better way to put it to different things. I mean, we see this again, I'm going to go back to sports, but coaches, some guys you have to pat on the back, other guys respond better to, being screamed at or challenged or, whatever it might be. So as a leader, knowing how to motivate or, get the reaction that you want out of each individual person, it can all be different.
It has to be different. And we do the DISC assessment, and there's all sorts of assessments.
Right.
But what I liked about the DISC was, number one, I could do it without being certified, and I could do it with other firms. But the second thing I really liked about it was it honed in on a workplace type profile and how to work as a team. And so it had 4 quadrants, as you know. And one of the things that I had our team at Johnson Health Center do, and I've had a lot of other teams do it since then and even before then, you have to be able as a leader to function optimally in all 4 of those quadrants, no matter what your dominant quadrant is. You can't default yourself into your own quadrant and expect everyone to fall into your quadrant. You have to be able to function in all of those quadrants to be a good leader. And those that are able to do that successfully are the ones that you want to work for, and those that you want leading your operation or whatever it is they're doing. Those that can't do that are going to struggle. So you're right. There's times when I've had to, and my disc profile is an I, and it teeters on the S, which is the I is more of the inspirational, to almost like the coach. The coach that we've been called cheerleaders from time to time, so I get some of that. But the S is also inviting other people into the conversations, and it's a steadiness factor. But the C and the D are the domineering personalities. The D in particular that basically just wants to go for the results, and they don't want the small talk. The C's, they want you to basically, you've got to articulate it from a data point that leaves no doubt that decision is the best one you're going to make. So I have to function in all of those quadrants. So if I'm dealing with somebody who is show me all the data, I'm going to be skeptical of anything you bring me unless I see every single thing. I know how to approach that person, and I know how I'm going to go prepared for that person. Same as I would expect that person to know my style if they're going to be in the leadership role, to know how to approach me. And the same applies for all of our team. And so that is where we have to be situational leaders. Anyone who's going to lead an organization, you talked about the coaching, Vince Lombardi. I do remember him vaguely, but I remember reading about him, I remember watching him. He seemed to be beloved, and he seemed to me that he would have had that ability to kind of operate in some of those quadrants, but he also seemed he could be very tough.
Yes.
So, and there's all the coaches that have come along since, and some have made it, some have not made it, and it goes, it spans the whole spectrum. I think of Phil Jackson when he coached the Bulls and the Lakers, and he seemed to have the ability to get along with just about everybody at some level. And he had a lot of personalities that I try to organize. And I always tell people, it is similar to being a professional or any kind of coach. One of your biggest things you'll have to do is figure out how to get all the egos to function well together, because typically when you're leading a group of other leaders, everyone has their own priorities. Everyone has their own style. And so how you marry all those up is a very important piece, but knowing how your own style applies to theirs is probably the most critical, and how you can adjust your own style based on who you're dealing with. So you get the optimal performance out of them, and you get the optimal performance out of your whole team.
Speaking of coaches, let me ask you about a guy who I'm not very fond of. Okay. But he's been extremely successful up until recently. He's had some problems down in Carolina with his little girlfriend.
Oh, what are you talking about?
Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
And what I love about him is, again, maybe oversimplified, but his biggest coaching philosophy, leading philosophy, whatever you want to say, do your job. If everyone just does their job, it functions together. But as soon as there's a breakdown there, then someone else is covering for someone else, and then they're not able to do it. And that's one of the things, to be perfectly honest, that we've been talking about here at James River Media is, it feels like we've been a lot of ready, fire, aim, because people are just all over the place trying to help other people out. And it's like, whoa, take a break, slow down. And if you just focus on what you're supposed to do and you get that done and everyone does the same thing, then we have a really good organization. Is that oversimplified?
I don't think it's oversimplified. I think the messaging today versus maybe what would have been when Coach Belichick was in the middle of winning his Super Bowls.
Helps to have Tom Brady, though, as much as I hate to say that.
But I think, I go back to what I said, too, coming out of the pandemic. People want to be, even if you look at the, we talked about, and the millennials got all the headlines, 4 or 5 years ago. Now the Gen Z is getting it, and now Alpha's getting it. And I think that everybody's trying to figure out how to communicate and work with Gen Z right now. And then Alpha's going to leave some of the others scratching their heads. So we'll see how that works. But I think that the concept of that is great. I mean, I think you have to do that. Everyone has to do their job. It's how you message that now so that it comes across in a way that makes people want to do that. You have to tie it back to their mission. You have to tie it back to the why. You have to tie it back to so many different things now than we've had to do 10, 12, 15 years ago, whereas you say just do your job and we will be the most successful group around. I think as we've seen generations move into the workplace now that have become the more dominant generation, there's a different level of expectations from them. They want to know more than just, okay, to just do your job. They want to know, all right, what does my job mean for this, or how does it impact it over here? When can I get promoted? You know, how am I going to get developed? I want to be the boss in the next 3 or 4 years. Those are like real things we deal with.
And those are the college graduates, right?
Those are the college graduates. Yeah, and I love them. I will say this, that I do get to work with some very talented people that come straight out of college and have a lot of great ideas, and even out of trade schools and tech schools. You know, but I think there's a lot more effort that has to happen and a lot more patience on people who are the business owners and who are the CEOs or the, you know, directors or the officers or the organization or the leads or just the supervisors for these folks that are coming in, because they need to know a lot more about the why than I think what we're accustomed to in the past.
Do you get that a lot when you're talking with, you know, business leaders or CEOs or managers? It's, you know, folks who, you know, maybe Gen X people who are used to putting in long hours and working hard and, you know, earning what they get. And then these newer generations come in and it's, how many days off do I get?
Yes.
You know, and it's, you know, I got to leave at 4. I'm only going to work from home or whatever the case may be. And we're sitting there going, wait a second, don't you understand?
Yeah.
You pay your dues, and but it's a different world.
It's a different world. I do some work with the Oncology Association of North Carolina. I speak for them every couple of years, and I was down there a couple of years ago, and getting ready to go back do some work with them. They're a great group, but I remember doing a session. It was a conference that they were having, and it was a hybrid conference. So you had the chat room going too, and I could see the chat room on the big board behind me, and in addition to the people in front of me. And I like to monitor the chat room. I'm all over the place when I'm speaking because I always say I'm highly caffeinated. So I move a lot. I've stayed pretty still in this seat, so I feel pretty good about that. But I remember looking at the chat room, and I was talking about the generations in the workplace. And at the time, we had 5, including traditionalists, who were over the 80 group now. So there's still, I think, some 80-year-olds that are in the workplace. So we may have up to 6 generations in the workplace now. But at the time, we were talking about the 5 generations. And I remember monitoring those chat rooms, and I could tell exactly what generation they were from just based on the comments they were making about they should just do their job, or, you know, how do we get them to come to work? How do we get them to quit calling in sick one day every 2 weeks? I mean, there was a lot of these things were just going. And I finally just said, you know, and it's what I tell my own team at the health center and anybody else I work with. This is one common theme across everybody that I get to talk with and deal with. But I always tell people this: you can only control what you can control. And we know about the workforce, we know about the labor shortages, we know about the, you know, sort of the talent gaps in a lot of different areas. We as leaders have to approach differently. And, you know, I think this is where some of the patience that I've been blessed with having has come into play, at least on some of the occasions. Now you hit your own threshold every so often. That's just the way it is.
Some of us quicker than others.
Some of us quicker than others. That's why we have to have teams so we can talk each other off the ledge. So, and I've been talked off the ledge before. But it is really around, we have to embrace the fact that the expectations are different. Now, how do we reach these folks? How do we help them see what we're trying to accomplish as an overarching, you know, strategy plan or goals and objectives and things like that? So that's when I always joke and say, being a CEO these last few years has been the hardest time. And, you know, I've had to be the CEO because things are just different now. And I think things really are different now. I don't think, and I'm not sure it'll go back to where it may have been 10 years ago. I do think the 2020, the 2021, the sort of the pandemic caused a resetting of some things and what people wanted. But I also know that at the end of the day, we have seen some turnover come down because people still need to be paid. People still need to go out and do the work. And I will say this about the Gen X folks that I've gotten to work with, is that they do want to achieve. I just think that they want a lot more involvement on how they achieve and how they get there. And so it kind of goes back to your first question earlier about just do the job. We have to do a lot more of explaining on how to do the job. We have to do a lot more with these people. And I just tell leaders that we can no longer default to just do it because I said do it. And I think that has been in my DNA since I was leading the health center, but I think that's been kind of baked into me because my style is such that I like to be part of the bigger picture. I like to understand what's going on, sort of the why behind things. And so, not that my style is everybody's style, but I've tried to help others see the things that I have always wanted to see as well as an employee. I've tried to help them from the CEO level and help my team that leads these people come from the same place of let's just help them understand why we're doing what we're doing. I keep every staff member at Johnson Health Center familiar with our strategic plan, our 3-year strategic plan. It's published. It's out there for everybody to see. I do updates on it because I don't want to have someone meet me at the water cooler one day and say, why do we change this? And not know why. Because I can look back and say, well, if you would have read the highlights in the strategic plan or talked to your supervisor about why we did it, then that should be fairly clear. So it doesn't cover everything. I always say we're not 100% accurate in how we communicate. Sometimes we fail, but we make 100% effort to be right.
Talking with Gary Campbell, CEO still at Johnson Health Center for the remainder of 2026 and founder of Impact to Lead. And I want to take just a couple minutes to kind of run through the word impact because it's the name of the company, but it's also an acronym and starts out with the I, inspire.
It does. And it took me, it's interesting because you know how hard it is to come up with a name? And I didn't use ChatGPT or anything back then. They didn't have that stuff. And I hope I wouldn't do it now. My wife always said, you just pray about this. And I'm like, all right, I'll pray about this thing. It took me 3 weeks to come up with that name. And I'm like, because I knew what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to drive a value approach into people I get to work with. And so I'm sitting there on my sofa on a Saturday morning. I mean, after 3 weeks of just, back and forth with myself, with, talking to people about what do we call this thing? And I remember sitting there saying, I just want to make an impact. And I'm like, that hit me right there. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's it. That's it. And so that's how I came up with impact. And so I really wanted to take the things that I had been focused on in my own leadership journey and break that down from the acronym perspective and have a pillar under each one of those. So it always starts with vision. And so the I was to inspire. And I get asked a lot of times that, hey, you're a motivational speaker. I do. I get asked this all the time. Matter of fact, I got asked it so much that I responded back in almost in a way that says, I don't want to be a motivational speaker. I want to be an inspirational speaker. I always said because motivation is for the moment, but inspiration is for a lifetime. And so the inspire to influence became the I. And when you think about needing to accomplish something in your own career or as an organization, if you don't have the ability to inspire a shared vision, to influence others to come along, you can't do anything by yourself. And so that's why the inspire to influence came in, and then you baked out a whole lot of things under that particular pillar. And then the M was for make it personal. Mm-hmm. And why that was so important was because the degree of importance emotional intelligence is. And it goes back to, just do your job. How do we create that? How do we become a successful emotionally intelligent leader? So we're recognizing all of the situations in which we lead. And so a lot of the work I do around making it personal is around emotional intelligence work, is around helping people recognize their own styles.
Explain emotional intelligence.
Well, Daniel Goleman really, it's been around since probably before 1900, but it really took off in the workplace with Daniel Goleman's work back in the 90s on when he wrote the book on emotional intelligence and building out emotional intelligence. He's written a lot of things on emotional intelligence, but essentially it is about being self-aware, knowing your own self and knowing being socially aware. So you have to be not only aware of yourself, but you have to be aware of the environment around you. And then having the ability for self-control and being able to manage how you respond to things. And then there's four, I'm trying to think of all four of them off the top of my head here. Empathetic. Empathy is another one that falls in the category because you have to put yourself into the position of others. So it really is putting, not being sympathetic, but being empathetic to the people that you're working with and understanding the traits that you may display and how it impacts other people, but also being able to recognize other people's traits in a given situation or what they're going through so that you can work with them and you develop a tighter relationship with those people, because it's a relationship that's not built strictly on what you're asking them to do. It's a relationship that's built on why you're asking them to do it, and it goes beyond just the technical of reporting. It goes really on building those workplace relationships
and kind of making it about them.
Yeah, but there's a lot of data that really supports the successful emotionally intelligent leaders. Traditionally, we used to hear about the IQ, and the IQ really measures the level of intelligence that doesn't really change over time, doesn't change at all, according to the data. But the emotional intelligence can change. Those are things you can actually work on and improve. And it really comes to knowing yourself so that you have the ability to improve, how you operate, especially when you're under duress. So, we have this little emotional intelligence quiz we give, and it's a lot of fun because people are taking it in a nice, relaxed setting. So everyone usually scores pretty high. But I always say it'd be fun to take this little quiz if we were in the middle of some crazy, crises that we don't ever want to have happen.
Right.
But how would you come across if you were? I always tell people, take this right after you've been through a road rage incident, and then how would you respond to some of this stuff? So I always use that as when I'm speaking on emotional intelligence. I always talk about the thing that that made me go ahead and give into blood pressure meds was the time that I asked the doctor to give me 3 months to get my blood pressure down, and I was doing great. And on the way to the doctor that very morning, I got cut off by a black Cadillac. I wasn't 2 miles from the turn. And then not only did they cut me off, he sent me the one finger salute. And I'm like, why? I didn't do anything. I mean, maybe I did and just didn't know it, but I didn't think I did. And probably because I blew the horn. But by the time I got to the doctor's office, I walked in and I just told the nurse, I said, just let him give me the meds. And he did. He gave up. I said, I quit. Give me the meds. But I knew right then. And I even knew when I've been in certain leadership roles and my own emotions would get the best of me because I'm very passionate about things that I do. And I said, I've got to work on my emotional intelligence. And I've worked very hard on that. And I still work on it. You really work on it at home sometimes when, especially when you got a bunch of grandkids running around now there at one time. But it is really, it's a work on self. And that is probably the most work you can do to advance your own leadership skills, capabilities, and opportunities, is to make sure your emotional intelligence is constantly being worked on. And that's why I said the DISC is so important, because it gives you a good snapshot of who you are in the workplace.
You mentioned passion. That's the P.
Yeah. Passion is a passion really for enthusiastic participation. Because not that you get out of the bed each and every day and you're passionate about all the stuff you're doing, but you should be passionate about the path that you're on. And some people get into positions that they just don't like or don't want to be doing, and they want to get out as fast as they can. Mm-hmm. But I always tell people, if that is the building block to where your passion is, then wait it out, see it through, take what you can from it, and then move closer to your passion. But me as the leader, and if you're going to lead your organization, you have to believe in what you're doing. So I go back to the HVAC contractor. Everybody from being a contractor to running a multi-billion-dollar organization, you got to believe in what you're doing. You got to believe in it enough where there's not overdoing the passion, but enough passion to where it gets people excited about things. Because at the end of the day, you want to help them pursue their own passion too. And you hope it's with you, but if it's not, you want to be that building block that gets them to where they want to go. And that gives you the most opportunity to get the best out of those folks while you have them. So that's the passion behind it. The A is the authenticity, is being authentic in all things that you do. Being authentic and all of the things that you're doing in terms of, we talked about ego a little bit earlier and bringing all those egos together. When you go through the authenticity component, it is suspending your own ego for the benefit of others too. So it really is looking at taking an authentic approach to the work that you do and making sure that you're not putting yourself out front, taking the credit yourself, that you are truly bringing the others in around it, so that your true authentic self shows up at all times. And then I was just IMPA.
Character.
Thank you. I misspelled my own word every so often. The character through communication.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about what makes up communication, and you think about whether it's tone, whether it's like we're talking today, whether it's body language, whether it's emails, whether it's eye contact, whether it's how you sit in a meeting, that displays a lot about your character. And so what I've always said is that when we communicate our character, how do people see us if a word is not said? And when we're walking down the hallway, or when we're shooting off that email, or when we're addressing our staff or addressing our customers or anything, our character should always be on full display in such a way where, as I always say, how would I know you by just your Twitter handle? How would I know you by your Facebook account? If I didn't know you personally, what does it say about your character? So I always say that when you think about the number one thing that people are looking for in an organization to get better is communication. And there's no better place to communicate your own character through your channels of communication. So we focus on that in the model. And then the T, of course, is the trust to build a commitment to excellence. Because if you don't have the trust, and part of that trust component is you got to be good at what you do. You got to know the business, and you have to be able to follow through on the commitments that you say you're going to do. So it's a simplified approach to what the model looks like. But that is really, when I thought about the things that were important to me as a leader, those components of truly me being a good leader and developing myself and trying to develop others all resonated with me.
This word hasn't popped up a lot today in our conversation, but when we had talked previously, it did. And you chose not to use it for the I in impact. You used inspire to lead. But we talked a lot about integrity. And, when you look at authenticity, character, trust, right? Integrity is kind of woven into almost every aspect of this.
It is. And I guess the thing about integrity, and I think about leading with integrity, and I think I mentioned to you about the sales piece earlier. That felt off to me, because I think it goes back to your values. When we did our core values exercise at our health center, we narrowed it down to 37 values. 37. And we got those finally down to 5. Same with this impact model. In integrity, I did think about the word integrity. How do I blend that in here? But really, it's sprinkled throughout. It's an it's an unsaid word. It's probably not the right word to use there, but it's not mentioned, but it centers on everything. And I think you said it, authenticity, the trust component, the character piece, the ability to inspire. If you can't lead with integrity, if your people don't trust you or think you don't have if they think you have a hidden agenda, that your integrity piece is out the window. And so the integrity piece has to be that is a hygiene factor in every leader's toolkit. You have to have that if you're going to lead an organization, or lead anything for that matter. You have to be able to, do what you say, do it the right way, and be willing to walk away from something that may benefit you more dollar-wise, but not benefit you more value-wise.
This may not be an easy question to answer, but if you had to pick one thing that you think is the most important for building a culture, again, whether it be a sports team or a business or just one division of a business or whatever, is there one piece that it starts with?
I think it goes back to the values, the core values. And if you don't have your value system in place, what you subscribe to is both an employee, an organization, or just the department. You can't do really a heck of a lot beyond that. I mean, you can, but the core values are they're your guardrails. They keep you, like on this chair, they keep you moving down here. And anybody on your team, if you bring in somebody that deviates from one or two of those values, they're not going to be a good team fit. So before you can do anything with culture, you got to make sure you are aligned on values. I worked with a very large client on the West Coast recently, and one of the things they wanted to do was they wanted to overhaul their mission, vision, values. It's a big undertaking, but the way we did it was we basically we started with the highest level team and looked at the existing mission, vision, values, tweaked it, and then brought in the 35 directors. And then the 35 directors took a crack at it, and then solicited some input from their own folks. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it was overhauled quite a bit. And when they rolled this thing out in November of 2023, I believe it was 2024, they rolled it all out in 2024. This staff was so excited to get on board with it because at some level they had some input in it.
Yeah, everybody felt like they were part of it.
Everybody felt like they were part of it. And then when you have a team from the very highest level on down committed to it, and you can't be committed to it with lip service. Like you said earlier, you can't be just on a website. It's got to be lived and breathed every single day in all that you do. It should be in job descriptions. It should be in the job postings. It should be on your website. It should be hanging on the wall. It should be awards and recognitions based out of it. There should be terminations based on it. How you go about your business strategy should be based on it. If that is part of your DNA as a organization, that will become a central piece of your culture, how you maintain it. And then you have to be very careful with it, because if you are that serious about your values, and this is the group that I worked with out west, and we talked about it. I said, if you happen to sacrifice one of your values for a decision that you feel is a better one for the business, you lost it. You will lose it. And they didn't, and they haven't. And that's normally most people will not do that. But it's not hard not to do if you're not careful. But that is the key, in my opinion, to really transform a culture. You start with the values as your foundation, and you work from there.
And kind of circling back to when we were talking about sales before.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's chasing the buck, chasing the signature rather than what may be best for the client and therefore best for your company.
Yes. And I think that's probably why sales never, and I don't want to knock sales, because I have great friends that are salespeople, and there's some great salespeople out there. Not sure I would have been one of them. I think it would have been a little fun. I always say, my wife always says, "What's your calling?" And I'm like, I don't think it was sales. I like the relationship side of it. I think I'd have been a good account executive or account manager, because then I just go in and make sure they're happy,
right?
Or deal with all their issues. I mean, much like we do at the head of Johnson Health Center, I deal with happy people and not so happy people, and we try to have them meet in the middle somewhere. So,
before we wrap up, tell me about 2026.
2026.
It's your final year at Johnson Health Center. You're transitioning, like we said earlier, to a full focus on impact lead. But this is going to be a crazy busy year for you, because you're doing both. Your business is building up. You're certainly not going to let the folks at Johnson Health Center down. Tell me what this year looks like.
I've joked and said that, I don't know how other execs do it or other CEOs do it. I don't know if they're trying to take the equivalent of a victory lap or kind of casually ease out, but I want to go in sliding into home plate face first. And I want to make sure whatever we do continues to leave an impressionable impact. And we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of partnerships to build in this community. We have a lot of things that, we have a lot of challenges as a healthcare organization too. I mean, there's a lot of things from, the HR1 bill that came out that I think we can leverage to the benefit of some, and I talked to this with people that I consult with. That I think if we do this the right way, we can build better partnerships. I think we can build stronger alliances, and I think we can provide better care. And that's really the vision, is to see how we're in the last year of our strategic plan. So, it's a lot of things that are in play right now. But I got up this morning thinking, all right, what are we going to try to accomplish this day? And we got that new fitness center in Madison Heights and our new health center. That was always a vision to bring a different level of healthcare to a traditional practice, and that has been very successful. And I want to see, how we get people healthier. So I'm very excited about that. So yes, it's going to be busy, and the other piece on impact is picking up as well. So it's going to be a juggling act, but it'll just require an extra cup of coffee or two. and talking to great people like you and having these great conversations, because this is the passion. This is what inspires to do things. And I'm just excited about it. So we'll see.
Well, thank you for your time, and
Appreciate
congratulations on all you've accomplished for Johnson Health Center, and certainly good luck with Impact to Lead. And again, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Honored to be here.